think we're going to start. And I want to start by welcoming everybody to our inauguration of CadreTalk. And my name is Dawn Penfold. I'm president of Meeting Jobs, which recently partnered with Cadre. And first, a little bit about CadreTalk. We basically developed this series as an opportunity for you to grab your cup of coffee and take a short break out of your day. And I want you to mark your calendar for every Thursday at 2 p.m., where we'll have a 30-minute conversation with an industry expert on a variety of topics. And our goal at Cadre and Meeting Jobs is to give all the meeting and event professionals out there an opportunity to learn something new in this conversation, even if it's just one takeaway as everybody re-engages in our industry. So before we get started, let me tell you about who we are. Cadre is a very cool platform and a service offering a compliant, and the key word here is compliant, freelancer staffing model. This includes site staffing, virtual meetings, meeting and event project work. Bottom line, if you're hiring event staff, virtual event staff, or longer-term meeting or event professionals, Cadre is a source for you to find that talent that's affordable and compliant. If you're a gig worker in this industry, this is your go-to place to find work. And then Meeting Jobs offers an industry-specific job board, as well as services and retained search and resume pre-qualification services for the events and meetings industry. Together, Cadre and Meeting Jobs provides a full complement of labor resources across the hiring spectrum, from full-time planners to project-based contract planners to event staff. So I urge every one of you to visit hirecadre.com and meetingjobs.com. And a couple of housekeeping notes. Everyone's muted except for John and I. And if you have any questions, please submit them in the question area. At the end, we'll be dealing with as many questions as possible. And then stay tuned for the email and announcement for next week's Cadre Talk with my friend and colleague, Jim Spellos of Meeting You, discussing high-tech, low-cost, and do-it-yourself. So I'd like to introduce you to our guest today. And most of the time, Jonathan Howe needs no introduction. I will anyway, because he's so accomplished and he's a good friend. And Jonathan Howe is president and a senior founding partner of Howe & Hutton. He has written hundreds of articles and papers and has spoken to organizations all over the world. He is recognized as one of the true leaders of the not-for-profit organization bar, as well as hospitality, meetings, travel, and incentive, hotel, and trade show industries, and for trial and appellate advocacy. When it comes to legal matters in our industry, he is the source. He is admitted to practice before numerous federal district and appellate courts and is one of the few lawyers to have appeared and argued before the United States Supreme Court. I often receive calls from meeting and event professionals of who they should go to for legal matters, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Jonathan is the person I refer. So, and I want to start this conversation, first of all, by congratulating you, John, for your induction into the Events Council 2020 Hall of Leaders this week. That's quite an acknowledgement for our industry. It's huge. And John is zooming in from chilly Chicago, and today we're going to be discussing COVID-19 and what, if anything, we've learned. So I'm going to start, John, by saying our industry was shell-shocked and turned upside down a year ago. What are you seeing now, and within the realm of legalities, how are we moving forward?
Well, I think we're still somewhat shell-shocked, and I think what we're looking at, and I want to thank you first, Dawn, for that great introduction. Did it just the way I wrote it. And it's delightful. And thank you also for the Hall of Leaders introduction. That is, I really feel somewhat humbled to being the first lawyer to be admitted into the Hall of Leaders. I guess they were reluctant to let somebody come in from a little bit inside the industry, but outside the industry at the same time. But to specifically as to your question, we've learned a lot, or at least I hope we have learned a lot, relative to the impact of the pandemic and shutting down, for all intents and purposes, a very vibrant industry, putting millions of people out of work, creating all kinds of economic, personal, and mental difficulties as we go through this, and not everybody's been able to adjust or adapt to this, and that becomes part of the issue. I think what we've learned is that a lot of people say, well, we're getting ready for the new norm. Mm-mm. It ain't no new norm. It's going to be a new reality. And we're not going to be doing business the same way that we were doing business before. And it won't be anywhere close in some respects as to what we were used to, what we were adapting ourselves to do as we move forward. We're looking at how do we really take into consideration the recovery that we're going to be going through, hopefully. And I think I am optimistic. I'm a cautious optimist when it comes to this.
Mm-hmm.
But when we look at all of this, we've learned a lot of lessons, I hope. And we were talking before a little bit about people adjusting to working from home, being able to find new talents, new opportunities, and taking advantage, if they did, of the opportunity to learn something new, and to catch up or to get something to adjust our talents as to how we approach things and how we go forward with them. COVID-19, the last pandemic that the country and the world faced was 1918, the Spanish flu. And I somewhat optimistically said, remember after 1918 came the roaring 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And are we now entering into a period where we're going to have the equivalent of the roaring 20s, hopefully without the depression at the end of it, but rather a lot more prosperity, opportunity, and progression going forward.
Or
But
prohibition.
well, don't even want to talk about that. But yeah, probably that was a misnomer. That whole thing. It may have been prohibition, and it just made a lot of bootleggers very rich. I think anytime you try to do sort of social mores and make them into laws, you run into new opportunities for what people can do and how they can profit. But I don't see that coming. I certainly don't see prohibition coming. Quite candidly and quite openly, what we saw was when we had what were essential stores to be able to go to and have them open, liquor stores were right on the list, right along with everybody else, whether it be for food, but there was a recognition. But having said that, what we're looking at now, Dawn, I think is really being able to look realistically at what I think are about rethinking things. I sort of wrote down, and you and I had a quick chat about this, but the things we're rethinking are our contracts and how we negotiate. We're rethinking the needs of the people who come to our meetings, not to mention the people who service and provide the value to our meetings overall. We're rethinking how we deal with the future, and we're rethinking what we're going to do and how we're going to go about being part of our business and making it work for us.
Interesting. Now, we did get a question that came through here, and it was more on the employee side, and it said, is my understanding that employers are not legally able to require their employees to get the vaccine? So we're dealing with the vaccine issues. And are they able to require people, because everybody's going to be re-gearing and rehiring, and what can you do and what can't you do?
Well, we now have a fascinating new legal issue as to what can you require. The better, and of course, here the great lawyer answer is it will depend. And what it's going to depend upon is what your particular jurisdiction where you're doing business or where you're working or where you want to do and provide work are going to require. The better part right now is a belief that you can, as an employer, require people to be vaccinated. I think let's make the next step. You, as a meeting professional, can you require your attendees to have the vaccination?
That was my next question.
And so I think the answer to that is yeah, I think we can. And the reason I say that is your meeting is something that is not a required factor. Your meeting is something that you can set the rules as to who can attend and how they can attend. would we look at this maybe this way? Can you require somebody to pay to attend your meeting? Of course we can. And so this now becomes a similar type of requirement as to saying, if you're coming to my meeting, we want you to be vaccinated. The problem with that is you may have, from your standpoint, the issue of, okay, so if somebody says, I did get vaccinated, let's say they fibbed, what are you going to do about it from the standpoint of enforcement? And similarly, we may say, if you're coming to my meeting, you've got to maintain social distancing, you've got to wear a mask, and you decide you're not going to wear a mask, you're not going to social distance. What do you have as a right as the meeting organizer? You have the right to have that person excluded. And so the issues here are, you're looking after the safety and health of the people who are going to be at your meeting, the people serving that meeting, and the other publics that they're going to come in contact with. So I think an equal question here is, what if you don't require people to have a vaccination
Are there
before they come to
liabilities?
your meeting?
Yeah.
And now, are you going to be responsible for people who don't have the vaccination? Somebody says, well, I got it. But hopefully, if everybody you've asked to be at your meeting has been vaccinated, the question of them being able to come down and get it as a result of somebody showing up at your meeting without the vaccination, that's going to be a nice, interesting legal challenge to show a chain and show causation and be able to tie it back as to that person as to why you got it. We've got lots of issues like this, which law school professors are going to have an abundance of opportunity to challenge their students as to the what ifs, and to take it out in the true Socratic method of taking it down the chase of the absurd.
I'm going to just switch the topic just a little bit with force majeure. Where it was, we all know where it was prior to the pandemic. And where are we going with force majeure? What are the differences now with the pandemic?
Well, let me put it this way. Force majeure hasn't changed a bit. Force majeure is a legal concept, is that performance has been made impossible as a result of something over which neither party has had any control. That's still there. What we're talking about is, what do I put in my contract to relieve me of liability? It's not, I'm a purist when it comes to force majeure. And one of the things that just fingernails on a blackboard for me has been people taking, and let me put it somewhat bluntly, but not politely, bastardizing the whole concept of force majeure. The fact that somebody slips from a 5-star to a 3-star hotel is not a force majeure. It's something you put in your contract that you want to be relieved of liability as a result of that not being able to be performed at the time of your meeting. So let me back this up a little bit. One of the concerns I have in negotiations, we go about our negotiations in the past a little bit in the wrong way. I'm asking and challenging you as a meeting professional to establish what are the key dates that you have to have in order to make a decision as to a go or no go. What are the key factors that are going to make that decision as to go or no go opportune? So what I'm saying here is, if you're doing a program in September, when is it that you have to have all your ducks in a row to make that go forward? Is it January? Is it last year? Is it 2 months out, 3 months out, a year out? Those are the dates you need to look at and put in and have as opportunities for you to renegotiate or get out of the contract. And one of the problems today, too, is when we were looking at force majeure, when we do force majeure, I can't tell you whether it's going to be a force majeure tomorrow, because until it happens, we don't know. And so we now have to look at our contract drafting in an entirely different way of setting forth what are those things that are key, and if they occur or don't occur, I need to bail. And same thing is true for the properties, the arenas, the convention centers. What are the key things that have to be in play for them? If all of a sudden you have, and you're a hotel and you're told that you got limitations on getting your people to work, you may want to have that as part of an opportunity to get out without liability. What we're talking about is how do I escape without liability?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I had one meeting planner pop up on the screen and she said, should we use the terminology COVID-19 or pandemic? And what is the proper terminology there?
Well, the proper terminology is get rid of both. And the
Yeah.
proper terminology is what do you want to say? If all of a sudden you have a travel ban, if there's something that's going to impede the ability to deliver the quality event that you want to have, those are the things we tie in. And when we talk about force majeure, of course, the traditional force majeure, something over which neither man, woman, or child has any control that makes performance impossible and which neither party has had any control over the ability to do so. And so, the example I like to use, though it's a terrible example, it's a terrible example of a disaster. Go back to 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
9/11, terrible. But from a force majeure standpoint, unless you were holding a meeting at the Marriott at the foot of Wall Street, at the foot of the towers,
Or at
the
window.
Essex House was open, the Waldorf was open, the Marriott Marquis was open. Other hotels were not closed down. So they were still able to deliver the product. And you say, oh, wait, the airlines got shut down.
Right. I was just going to
They
say
were
that.
told not to fly. Well, trains were still running, buses were still running, cars were still running. You get on your bicycle. I mean, there were still alternatives that you could use. What made the industry very important and made it very understanding was that people realized people weren't going to travel. They weren't going to go anywhere after 9/11. And remember, after 9/11, what was the big mantra that went forward? Get out of the house, travel, go somewhere, do something. What's our mantra right now? Don't leave the house. Sequester yourself, quarantine yourself. Don't. So we got two different messages, and when we look at this with COVID-19 or with the pandemic, we had an economic disaster, we had an emotional disaster, and we had a health disaster. And so people were not inclined to leave their homes. In fact, one of the things that we look at right now are what are the surveys showing as to when people are going to be ready to travel. Now, I have been in severe airplane withdrawal since March 17th, was the last time I was on an airplane.
It's amazing.
But having the benefit of getting the shots, I will be back on an airplane on March 2. Now, I'm looking forward to it. I can't say I exactly missed airline food since there's not much airline food anymore, but nonetheless, the ability now for people to look at it. There are still going to be people all over, and I would be hesitant if it was not for the vaccine and my confidence in what I am being told by the scientists. And, we're going to that aspect of being able to travel. But we're going to have a lot of people. The president said that everybody be vaccinated, we'd all be taken care of. I think he said end of spring. Well, now, last time I saw Biden, he said, well, it'll be the end of July and maybe August. Uh, Now we're seeing even pushback on that. So optimistically, people might begin to be ready to travel third quarter, fourth quarter of this year, first quarter of next year. But it's going to depend. And we still have a lot of companies that are saying to their employees, thou shalt not travel until we release you to do so. And we're banning you from travel except for important and required travel through the end of the year. Uh, all of these things come into play, Dawn, and that's
Well,
what makes it so important.
and while you were talking, the other thing that was coming into play in my mind is that different states are having different regulations with how many people can attend meetings and how many people can gather.
Well, and that's it too. I mean, in the days gone by, what we had was we had a lot. If you had planned your meeting in 2019 for 2021, 2020, 2019 was a bumper year. So you increased your numbers, you increased your space, you increased your sleeping rooms. And now what we're doing is we're reducing our sleeping rooms and increasing our space because of social distancing
So
and,
the
and, and,
attrition
and the
clauses
like.
are the attrition clauses changing dramatically?
Only if you negotiate them. And that becomes the key. You got to look at how you're going to evaluate your meeting. One of the things that so many meeting professionals don't do, they don't set forth what is the purpose of your meeting. What are you trying to accomplish? And so if you're trying to accomplish a product introduction, don't you want to have a provision in your contract should that product not be available at the time of the meeting? You can bail. Of course you should, but we don't. We don't put that in there. We wait and sort of throw the dice, if you will. The key element is, as I go back to what I said a minute ago, evaluate what are the drop dead dates for your program to be a success. And we bake those then into the contract as to where we're going. And I think timelines, demographics, the demographics of a group are really important too. Where are your people coming from? To go back to your comment about the variances between states, I'm in Chicago. It was 25 people or 25%. We're now up to 50 people. We're looking at all kinds of variations. And let's compare Florida, let's say, to California. Florida's been relatively wide open within limits. California has been widely closed down.
Yeah.
The opportunities have been basically, when we look at it, that the numbers in Florida for COVID on a per capita are less than the numbers in California. So what does that tell you? I don't know, but it makes for an interesting anomaly.
Okay, well, we've got about 8 minutes, and I'm going to have you switch your mindset on this and go to another question. We've got a few questions here. This one is dealing with the 1099 workers. And it said, do you think California's AB5 will go national where it is harder for freelancers to work as 1099 workers? Will someone that works 4 hours for a client have to be part-time employee?
Well, the whole thing with ABC concept has been around for a while, and it basically says if you exert any kind of control over the individual, they're not an independent contractor. Independent contractor, from a federal standpoint, currently with the Internal Revenue Service, there used to be what was called the 20-point checklist. It's sort of changed a little bit, but the more control that you exert over the individual, the less likely they're going to be an independent contractor. What we're seeing too is, and this is where I think is a rather interesting stretch, if you are a corporate forum, in other words, if you're an LLC or you have your own personal corporation, you're generally always considered to be an independent contractor. But now what we're seeing is some attempts in some states to say, well, even if you're a corporate form and they exert control over you, we're going to deem you to be an employee. But that's a stretch, and I think that the courts are going to be wrestling with that. I hope to God that the whole approach that has been taken in California does not become a nationwide practice. The independent contractor, the gig rule, the whole thing in California was basically attacking Uber and Lyft as to drivers as to what they're doing. And the virtue of being an Uber or a Lyft driver was that you were independent. You could come and go as you wanted. You could sign on and sign off in the middle of the roadway, whatever you wanted to do. So that was one of the attractions. And then the companies began to adapt a little bit to providing some benefits and some other opportunities for people. But the deal in California just hopefully will not become nationwide. But if you're dealing with California now, there are going to be, and there are, legal challenges to what the ABC aspect is going to be, or AB, I think it's 5.
Okay, thanks. Next question. Owing to COVID, many properties have necessarily had to reduce staffing levels, potentially affecting quality of services promoted and in effect at time of contract execution. Should we be more diligent in our agreements with the deterioration of quality provision and how we can specify the level of lowered service before we need to cancel without liability from an agreement due to lowered service?
The short answer is yes, we can.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is in our contract negotiations and design, we expect the same level of service that's there. I'm not saying get to the point where you're designating how many bartenders you have to have for X number of people who are going to be there. But the key element is to hold the hotel. I was just on a phone call with trying to settle a deal where the hotel had, at the time the contract was signed, 300 employees. And when I asked the general manager how many employees he had on duty right now, he said, well, on a good day, we have 60. So from 300 to 60 on a good day, that tells you a lot.
So somebody said, so when can you claim force majeure? Right now, hotel can't accommodate a full 100%, but only 75%. What if things in April change for better or for the worse?
The magic word was right now. But force majeure traditionally, and as the law looks at it, it's not right now. It's when the event is to occur. That's why I go back to what are your timelines? So you may want to have in your contract that if there's any reason 180 days out that will make it impossible at that moment, 180 days out, to make it impossible or impractical or not successful for my meeting to go forward, I reserve the right to cancel without liability or to renegotiate.
Great.
So I think that's what we look at. And the other thing that we've been, as we've gotten further down the pike and we have the vaccines and we have a degree of optimism as to how things are going to go, what we have been doing in negotiation, maybe we can't relocate them or replace it at a later date. What we're doing is saying, okay, let's look at the cancellation clause. Can we move all the fees for cancellation? Can we extend those and make them closer to the event? So instead of 180 days, you'll pay X, Y, and Z. Let's take that 180 days and make it 30 days. Okay. And be able to do some things there. And we have found with even the most adamant hotel, we're getting some positive playback with that.
Okay, John, we have 1 minute. I'm going to ask you to give your 1 minute closing piece of advice, tip, something, whatever.
Well, I guess I would say keep the faith, pay attention, keep moving, be positive. And I think that what we're going to be looking at is being prepared. And I think these little conversations are great, Dylan, to get people up to date and up to speed because every day changes. When I first started doing a lot of the webinars, I would do a PowerPoint. I finally abandoned doing any PowerPoints. Why? Because the PowerPoint I put together on a Monday doesn't apply on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
Conditions have changed. So you got to stay on top of it.
And speaking of that, you've agreed to come back and talk with us again on, I think it's April 22nd. So thank you. And thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you.
Good luck to everybody. Stay well and stay warm and keep the electricity on.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you for coming to CadreTalk. Bye, John.
Bye-bye.